A new message related to the possible abduction of Nancy Guthrie. The 84-year-old mother of Savannah Guthrie disappeared from her home 6 days ago.
I have watched the Porch footage dozens of times, and for a long time I was focused on the same things everyone else was focused on. The backpack, the mask, the dark clothing, the way the person moved across the porch in the early morning hours before Nancy Guthrie disappeared. But recently, started paying attention to something else. Not what the person was carrying, not even what the person was doing. I started paying attention to what they seemed to know. Because the longer this case remains unsolved, the harder it becomes to ignore a question that has been sitting in plain sight from the beginning. How much knowledge would someone need to pull this off? Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She lived alone in a gated home in Tucson, Arizona. According to publicly reported information, she returned home on the evening of January 31st after spending time with family. By the next day, she was gone. Then investigators released the porch footage. Almost immediately, the public focused on identifying the person in the video. Makes sense. After all, this is the only known image of someone directly connected to the night Nancy disappeared. Identifying the person and understanding the person are two different things. The footage gives us a glimpse of behavior, and behavior can sometimes tell us things that a face cannot. One of the first things that stands out is the amount of time the individual spends on porch. This is not someone sprinting toward the house. This is not someone moving with obvious urgency. The person pauses, looks around, appears to evaluate the environment, then eventually covers the doorbell camera. Now consider that for a moment. If the camera was a known obstacle, why was it still recording long enough to capture so much footage? A person who had thoroughly planned every detail would likely have addressed the camera immediately. Instead, the footage appears to show someone adapting in real time. That does not necessarily mean the person was unfamiliar with the property, but it may suggest they were not as prepared as people initially assumed. And that observation creates an interesting contradiction, because other parts of the case suggest a surprising amount of knowledge. According to investigators, multiple cameras around the property were affected during the night Nancy disappeared. Reports have indicated that certain security systems were disrupted. If those reports are accurate, someone understood enough about the property to interfere with surveillance. That level of knowledge does not happen by accident, which raises an obvious question. Where did that knowledge come from? One possibility is surveillance. Someone could have watched the property for days or weeks. Another possibility is familiarity. Someone may have already known aspects of the home before that night. Neither theory has been proven publicly, but both remain important, because every investigation eventually comes back to opportunity and access. Now consider the timing. Nancy was reportedly dropped off at home shortly before 10 p.m. Hours later, the person appears on the porch. That means whoever planned this operation knew exactly when Nancy would likely be alone. That detail is easy to overlook. Investigators often pay close attention to timing because timing reveals preparation. A random criminal can choose a house. A prepared individual chooses a specific moment. The question becomes whether that moment was selected through observation or information. And those are very different things. Then there is the layout of the property itself. Public reporting has described doors being propped open during the night Nancy vanished. Investigators have discussed entry and exit points around the home. When you look at the details together, a picture begins to emerge of someone who knew where they were going. That does not automatically mean the person had been inside the house before. It does suggest a level of confidence. Think about the difference between entering a completely unfamiliar building and entering one you already understand. The unfamiliar location forces hesitation. The familiar location allows movement. Every wrong turn creates risk. Every moment spent searching creates exposure. Whoever entered Nancy's property appears to have avoided much of that uncertainty. That fact alone has led many observers to wonder whether the person possessed information that extended beyond what a stranger could easily gather from a distance. But something doesn't fit, because alongside those indications of planning, there are also signs of mistakes. The porch footage itself appears to show moments of uncertainty. The camera remained active long enough to capture the suspect. Certain actions seem less polished than what many people would expect from an experienced offender. This creates a strange combination: knowledge in some areas, confusion in others, preparation in some areas, improvisation in others. And that combination has caused some investigators and commentators to ask whether more than one person could have been involved, not necessarily at the scene, but in the planning, because sometimes the person carrying out a task is not the same person who designed it. That possibility remains entirely speculative. There is no public evidence proving such a scenario occurred. It helps explain a contradiction that continues to appear throughout the case. Knowledge that seems highly specific. Behavior that sometimes appears less sophisticated. Now consider another detail: the communications that followed Nancy's disappearance. Several ransom-related messages were reportedly sent after she vanished. Those messages demanded cryptocurrency. According to public reporting, some of the communications included information that was not widely known, details connected to the home, details connected to the scene. If those reports are accurate, investigators would naturally want to know how the sender obtained that information. Were they present? Did they learn it from someone else? Or did the information originate from a source closer to the investigation? Those questions remain unanswered. They matter because information often leaves a trail. Sometimes investigators solve cases by following people. Other times they solve cases by following knowledge. Who knew what? When did they know it? And how did they learn it? Those questions can become just as important as fingerprints or surveillance footage. The more you examine this case, the more it seems to revolve around knowledge. Knowledge of Nancy's schedule, knowledge of the property, knowledge of security systems, knowledge that appears difficult to explain through chance alone. That does not mean the person on the porch was related to Nancy. It does not mean a family member was involved. It does not mean any specific theory is correct. It does leave us with a question that investigators have almost certainly considered. If the individual captured on that porch was not a complete stranger to Nancy's world, then where exactly did that familiarity begin? Because the answer to that question may tell us far more about what happened that night than the mask ever will. The most difficult parts of investigating a case like this is separating what is unusual from what is merely unexplained. Every major investigation contains unanswered questions, but in the Nancy Guthrie case, some of those questions seem to point in the same direction, toward a specific person, not toward a specific suspect, but toward the possibility that whoever entered that property understood far more about Nancy's life than investigators have publicly revealed. Consider the timeline. Nancy was reportedly dropped off at her home at approximately 9:50 that evening. According to public statements, that was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. After that point, the timeline becomes increasingly difficult to reconstruct. Hours passed, the night moved on, and somewhere during those hours, the person captured on the porch arrived at the property. What stands out is not simply that someone showed up. What stands out is when they showed up. People often focus on location when discussing criminal investigations. Investigators frequently focus on timing. Timing tells you who had opportunity. Timing tells you who had access. Timing tells you who knew where someone would be. Nancy was not taken from a public place. She was not approached at a grocery store. She was not intercepted while traveling. Whoever targeted her appears to have done so when she was home, alone, late at night, in a location where very few people would be watching. That is a remarkably specific window. Now consider how difficult it would be for a complete stranger to identify that window with confidence. It is certainly possible. A person could conduct surveillance. They could observe routines. They could monitor activity. Criminals have done that before. Surveillance requires time, and time creates risk. The longer someone watches a target, the greater the chance they will be noticed. Which raises another question. If surveillance occurred, where is the evidence of it? Investigators have not publicly described weeks of documented surveillance. No photographs have been released. No witnesses have publicly reported repeatedly seeing the same suspicious individual near the property. Does not mean surveillance never happened. It simply means the public has not seen evidence of it. And because of that, another possibility continues to linger. What if some of the information did not come from observation at all? What if it came from familiarity? Possibility becomes even more interesting when you examine details connected to the property itself. Reports have indicated that multiple access points became important during the investigation. Doors, gates, entry routes, exit routes. These details matter because homes have patterns. Every property has certain pathways that residents use regularly. Family members learn them. Friends learn them. Service workers learn them. People who spend enough time around a property naturally become familiar with its layout. A stranger, in contrast, often learns through trial and error, and trial and error tends to leave evidence, mistakes, delays, confusion. Yet the available information suggests someone moved through the property with a level of confidence that investigators have never fully explained. Something doesn't fit. Because while there appears to be familiarity with the property, there are also details suggesting important gaps in knowledge. One example involves Nancy's health. Public reporting has indicated that Nancy required medication related to her heart condition. According to statements made during the investigation, those medications were reportedly left behind. For many observers, that detail became extremely important. If the purpose of an abduction is ransom, the victim must remain alive. The victim is the leverage. Without the victim, there's no negotiation. Without the victim, there is no payment, which is why some investigators and commentators have questioned why essential medication would allegedly remain at the residence. A person who knew Nancy's medical needs might be expected to understand its importance. A person who did not know Nancy might overlook it entirely, and that contradiction creates another puzzle. Some details suggest familiarity. Details suggest unfamiliarity. Knowledge in one area, blind spots in another. Then there are the ransom communications themselves. Those messages first appeared, many people assumed they provided a straightforward explanation. Someone had taken Nancy. Someone wanted money. Case solved. But investigations are rarely that simple. The messages raised almost as many questions as they answered. Deadlines were reportedly established. Demands were reportedly made. Yet according to publicly available information, proof of life never emerged in the way investigators would typically expect. No publicly released recording. No verified photograph. No confirmed communication from Nancy herself. That absence has been discussed repeatedly by former investigators. Because in traditional ransom cases, proof of life is often critical. The person demanding payment usually wants the family to believe the victim is alive. Without that assurance, negotiations become much more difficult. So why did that evidence never appear publicly? Investigators may know the answer. The public does not. And whenever information is missing, theories begin to fill the gap. Some theories point toward strangers. Others point toward people closer to Nancy. At this stage, none of those theories have been proven. They reveal something important about the way this case is perceived. Many people are no longer asking who was on the porch. They are asking who benefited from the information that person possessed. Because information keeps appearing at the center of this story. Information about Nancy. Information about the house. Information about timing. Information about the aftermath. And information does not appear from nowhere. Someone learns it. Someone shares it. Someone uses it. The challenge facing investigators is determining which of those steps occurred here. Now consider one final detail. Every major case eventually reaches a point where investigators begin examining relationships. Not because relationships automatically indicate guilt. They do not. Investigators examine relationships because relationships create access. Access creates opportunity. And opportunity narrows possibilities. Who could enter the property without raising suspicion? Who understood Nancy's routines? Who knew when she would be alone? Who possessed information that an outsider would struggle to obtain? Those questions are not accusations. They are investigative questions, and they are often the same questions law enforcement asks behind closed doors. As we look deeper into this case, things becomes increasingly clear. The mystery may not revolve entirely around the person seen on the porch. It may revolve around the information that brought that person there in the first place. Because if someone supplied knowledge, access, guidance before Nancy disappeared, then the story becomes much larger than a single figure captured on a doorbell camera. And the evidence surrounding that possibility becomes difficult to ignore. At the center of this case is a simple question. The person on the porch operating entirely on their own? Or were they acting with information that originated somewhere much closer to Nancy Guthrie? That question has lingered since the first days of the investigation, and despite months of public discussion, it remains unanswered. The reason is simple. The evidence points in multiple directions at the same time. On one hand, investigators released footage showing an unidentified individual approaching Nancy's home in the early morning hours. The image is real. The person exists. Someone was there. That much is beyond dispute. But the footage alone does not explain motive. It does not explain planning. It certainly does not explain how the individual may have acquired whatever knowledge they possessed before arriving at the property. As investigators know, identifying a suspect and understanding a crime are often two separate tasks. Sometimes a case is solved the moment a face receives a name. Other times, identifying the person only creates more questions. Because then, investigators must determine how that person became connected to the victim in the first place. Brings us back to the issue that keeps appearing throughout this case. Access. The word itself sounds simple, but in criminal investigations, access can mean everything. Who had access to Nancy? Who had access to her routines? Who had access to information about her daily life? Who knew details that an outsider might struggle to obtain? The answers to those questions may ultimately prove more important than the porch footage itself. Now consider how many pieces of information appear to have converged around the same event. The timing of Nancy's return home. The apparent awareness that she would be alone. The navigation of the property. The activities surrounding the residence. The communications that followed. Individually, each detail can be explained in multiple ways. Together, they create a pattern that investigators have undoubtedly spent months trying to understand. Because patterns often reveal relationships, and relationships often reveal motives. That does not mean investigators have identified a motive, at least not publicly. Every major case eventually forces investigators to ask the same difficult question. Who benefits? Not necessarily financially, necessarily materially. Simply who benefits from the outcome. That question matters because people rarely commit serious crimes without a reason. The reason may be money. The reason may be personal conflict. The reason may be control. The reason may be something investigators have not yet discovered. But there is usually a reason. And somewhere within this case is a motive that connects the known evidence to the unknown truth. The challenge is finding it. Now consider the public reaction. Since Nancy disappeared, thousands of people have examined the available evidence. Many have reached conclusions. Some believe the answer lies with a stranger. Others believe the answer lies closer to home. The problem is that public opinion is not evidence. Investigations are not solved through popularity contests. They are solved through facts, through forensic evidence, through witness statements, through digital records, through details that can be proven rather than assumed. Distinction is important because cases like this often generate theories faster than they generate answers. And while theories can be useful, they can also become distractions. The strongest investigators focus on what can actually be established. What happened? When it happened? Who be placed where? Who can be excluded? And which explanation survives scrutiny? Everything else eventually falls away. That process takes time, sometimes far more time than the public expects. History is full of investigations that appeared impossible until one overlooked detail changed everything. A phone record, a vehicle sighting, a piece of DNA, a witness who finally decided to talk. Cases can remain silent for months and then suddenly move forward in a matter of days. That is why investigators rarely stop looking at old evidence. Because evidence does not change. Only our understanding of it changes. and it is entirely possible that the answer to this mystery already exists somewhere within the information collected by investigators. The challenge is recognizing it. As we look back at the porch footage today, it is tempting to view that image as the beginning and end of the story. The unknown person, the dark clothing, the backpack, the covered camera. Perhaps the most important lesson from this case is that the visible evidence may not be the most significant evidence. The person on the porch represents what we can see. The larger mystery may involve what we cannot see. The conversations nobody heard. The information nobody realized was being shared. The connections investigators may still be working to uncover, because crimes are rarely defined by a single moment. They are defined by the chain of events that made that moment possible. And somewhere within that chain is the answer investigators continue to search for. The person on the porch, a complete outsider, who learned everything through observation. Is the individual connected to someone familiar with Nancy's world? Or is the truth something far more complicated than either explanation? At this stage, the public simply does not know. What we do know is that Nancy Guthrie disappeared from her home under circumstances that continue to raise difficult questions. The person captured on the porch remains unidentified. The investigation remains active, and the central mystery remains unresolved. Until investigators provide definitive answers, every theory should be viewed as exactly what it is: theory, not a conclusion, because the difference between suspicion and proof is the difference between speculation and truth. Somewhere, someone knows exactly what happened that night. Whether that person was captured on the porch camera, connected to the events behind the scenes, simply carrying information they have never shared, only time will tell. For now, the search for Nancy Guthrie continues. If new evidence emerges, it may change the entire understanding of this case. Until then, the questions remain. Those questions are why this investigation continues to hold the attention of people across the country. If you followed this case from the beginning, leave a comment with your thoughts, and the piece of evidence you believe deserves the most attention. And if you want future updates as new developments emerge, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next investigation.